Nope. I was just like, everybody pretty much distanced themselves. And I was like, I don't even care. Like
Yeah.
I was at that point, like, I don't even care. I don't care if you like me. I mean, to my own family, I was like, I don't care. I think it's like that survival thing that kicks in. And
Yeah.
something happens where you just disconnect from everything other than living. And
Yeah.
it's like, I think it protects you from all the emotional, I don't know, distractions. I did have my clients, and there was a few of them that stayed, and I mean, a lot of them stayed, but a few of them that I would talk to. And I had one really smart client, and she's a psychiatrist, and she said, I heard a professor say when I was back getting her PhD at 1970 that one day the field of psychology and neurology will collide. And she said encouraging words to me, and that's all I needed. I just needed one
Yeah.
sentence from one person. you know.
Exactly. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Eat Real to Heal podcast. I am your host, Nicolette Richer. And like every episode, I always say we have the best guest coming on our show today. And it is always true. People have the most incredible stories to share, and I love bringing their stories to you so you can learn, so you can be inspired, so that you can take some of this advice, some of these stories, and maybe work them into your life to help you learn how to eat better, how to live better, how to sleep better, just really how so you can realize and get closer to that incredible innate human version of yourself that you might not be living authentically. Food heals the body. There is no doubt about that. It is undeniable that nutrition is our foundation. But of course, we also need to look at other factors in our world. And that's where Elizabeth Harris comes in. She is she is a powerhouse. And I cannot even begin to express my gratitude for this woman and the fight that she has had to live, the journey that she has had to walk and go through to be able to bring this knowledge to the world. She's got a new book coming out on October 26th that you absolutely need to have, so that you can learn about something that might be affecting you, but you just have no idea about the ramifications that it is having on your family. So let me tell you a little bit more about Elizabeth. So in 2008, that's not too long ago, Elizabeth's son came down with a case of strep throat, like many of you and myself, my kids have had. And after receiving antibiotics, he seemed to be feeling better, but then his behavior became extremely erratic. So she consulted with, dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of doctors and specialists, and went so many tests. It would blow your mind to see what this woman had to go through to be able to find out that her son was diagnosed with pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder associated with strep infection. So in other words, PANDAS. But the story, that's just the beginning. So she went through everything, prescribing him the medications, getting the medications for him, and of course, his psychiatric symptoms then really just got worse. But in this journey, she was able to find reprieve. She shares with you exactly what she went through to be able to get the answers that eventually not just saved her son's life, but saved her entire family life. Because what she found out is that what he was battling was also something that the whole entire family had as well. And it was able to help bring resolve to all the health issues in the family. Now, Elizabeth is the founder and owner of La Belle E Famosa Spa in Tennessee, a hugely successful place that you can go to if you are in the area. Now, she's also a scientist as well. She is pursuing her master's in molecular medicine, and she has a degree in biology and chemistry from Murray State University. She's also studying nutrition and physical fitness, cardiac rehab from the American College of Sports Medicine. So that's just the beginning, in addition to her being an incredible mother, an incredible human in our society. So I can't wait to share this podcast with you. Now, before we jump in as well, I want to let you know about a few things that are happening. We have postponed our run bike across Canada. Yet again, COVID is kicking everybody in the butt. We just want to make sure that when we do go across Canada and run and cycle, that we are able to do the work that we are wanting to do, which is really to gather with communities, BIPOC communities around across Canada, to better understand the barriers to accessing clean, fresh, real food, and to better understand what is in the way of achieving food sovereignty in these communities. We don't want to be infecting people. We don't want to be contributing to viral spread. We also just need to know what the heck is happening with COVID, which we're not going to get those answers anytime soon. So we've postponed it to 2023. Very exciting. But in the meantime, we do have the intro for our feature film documentary coming out, as well as another documentary called Grounded in My Roots, which is it's going to be a beautiful movie. Our film crew, Inlight Films, is phenomenal. They're the ones who followed me around my BC tour this summer, and they're the ones who conducted all the interviews, and they're going to be coming out with that documentary on our behalf in January. And before we go any further, definitely head over to our website, getoffyourfatass.com. We will have all the links in the show notes below. Fat being that you are fabulous, amazing, authentic, and you have the ability to transform yourself back into that person that you know you already are. You are perfect as you are, but you just might need some accountability, a kick in the butt. And that's where we come in to get you to set a BHAG, to get you to actually be able to make the changes that you've been wanting to see around the foods that you eat, around the ways that you move your body. So that is going to be going live on December 1st, a 6-week program to get you moving. It's only $150. It's the best thing ever. And I love teaching this program more than anything because I see the potential in you. I want you to see the potential in you and help you realize that through a change diet and movement. So without further ado, let's welcome Elizabeth Harris onto the show, and I'll see you at the end. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Eat Real to Heal podcast. I'm very excited to have Elizabeth Harris on the show today. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
So Elizabeth, you are in Tennessee, is that correct?
I'm in Franklin, Tennessee. It's just about 15 miles south of Nashville.
Nice, nice. I got to spend some time in Tennessee when I was going to university in Mississippi, and we traveled there to go listen to all the amazing music that they have there in Memphis. And yeah, it was pretty fabulous. I do miss it.
Phenomenal music around here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And the warmth. I miss the warmth too.
Oh, it's such a beautiful day today, even.
Wow. And it's pouring rain and freezing, and you need toques and sweaters to go outside. Hats and sweaters and jackets and boots, everything. So Elizabeth, we are going to be talking about a very, very interesting story that surrounded your life. And I just have to begin by saying I've loved diving into, and I really want the audience to get to know you as this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this super driven, feisty, determined mother who really was out there to find the root cause of your son's condition. So can we go back to that time before his symptoms started, and just tell me a little bit about, what you were doing at that time in your life? You had this beautiful baby, and what did things look like at that time before things just started to unravel?
Well, I mean, my career had taken off. I was a spa consultant. I owned one location here in Cool Springs. I had just developed my own cellulite reduction device and came out with my skincare line. And so things were really going well. I was traveling quite a bit, doing trade shows, teachings, etc. And then I also had a 16-year-old daughter at the time and 2 adopted children. So 4 total children in the home. Things were hectic. I mean, but they were under control and manageable. We had inventory sheets for our groceries. I mean, it was I ran the home kind of like I ran the business, And so, I mean, we did really well until it was around November, I think it was 2010 or so, when my son, caught strep throat. And it was odd because I walked into the kitchen and he was rolling around, like grabbing his stomach. saying his stomach hurt so bad. And I thought, I mean, that was the furthest thing I would have guessed, that I would have taken him in and he would have had strep, but that was the case. And he started on antibiotics and all seemed to be well, other than him just not feeling, the best, until a couple of weeks later. And just to be honest with you, initially I didn't put the two together, because out of the blue, he started to act very oddly. He initially just started buttoning his shirt up and down, on and off, over and over, and he couldn't move. He was just standing there. And I said, "What's going on?" He's like, "I'm just trying to get this shirt off." You've taken it off multiple times and put it back on. It didn't feel right going back on, so to redo it. And then he began walking over transition strep, and things just went more bizarre by the day.
So let's back up a bit. So how old was he at the time, just before he got, or when he got strep?
He was about 10 years old. He actually just turned 11.
And up until that point, describe your son and his behavior and his moods and what he was like.
He was very high energy. He had already been diagnosed with ADHD, and he took Concerta, but not on the weekends. But overall, that was pretty much it. Now, as a very young child, he had a lot of ear infections and pneumonia, several bouts with pneumonia, but he had appeared to outgrow those, and was functioning quite well. I had a lot of friends, birthday parties, just pretty typical.
Yeah. And so then when you started to know, would you describe these as OCD like behaviors? Then the buttoning up the shirt up and down, stepping over the transition strips in doorways, back and forth, or, like what, as a mother, and you see your child, doing this, like what was going through your mind at the time?
Well, I was just thinking, what's wrong with you? Because I didn't even know what OCD was, I was like, what are you doing? And you just kind of blow it off. And then, it honestly got a little annoying in the beginning, because he came in and he was like, "Can you dry my pants again?" I'm like, "They're already dry." He's like, "No, they're not." And then he was like, "Can you boil my toothbrush? I need you to get it up to 108 degrees. So it kills all the bacteria." And I was like, "What? Why? I didn't even know you knew that." And then, so that was day one. And I was already like, okay, this is weird. But then day two, things took like a whole other turn. And he decided he was going to make a tent. And so he pulled every single chair in the whole house. I mean, kids make tents. That's normal. I've seen a child make a tent before, but this tent was crazy. Every single blanket off the bed, the sheets, everything, for this huge tent that couldn't have a single hole. No air could be exposed. I mean, he worked for like 8 hours on this thing, and then he went to sleep in it, and I thought, okay. But then day three, and the whole time I'm like calling the doctor. I'm like, okay, there's something wrong. There's something going on. But he's trying to reassure me, saying this is normal. He's probably just playing hide and go seek. I'm like, okay. But by day three, he started crouching behind the chair in the living room. It's around Christmas. You had the Christmas tree up. And he felt like bugs were crawling on him. His pupils got huge. I mean, he just looked literally terrified. He wouldn't even let me touch him. His dad came to pick him up. He wouldn't go with him. And then he started thinking people were watching him through the windows. And that's when I started to get a little bit, hysterical, in terms of like, I got to do something. Something's going to happen.
Yeah, that must have been scary, especially because you're talking about a progression of your child gets strep throat, you take them to the doctors, takes a bout of antibiotics, and then you think things are just going to get better. And then all of a sudden now his behavior is completely changing. So then the doctor's saying like nothing to support you, obviously. And then, so what did you do then at this point?
So then I was just like, okay, maybe I'm, overreacting, as we all always do. So I called one of my colleagues over to the house and I said, okay, you've known this child for how many years now? I need you to tell me, is this like something drastically wrong? And he watched him for about 10 minutes and said, this child needs to go to the hospital.
Oh,
So
wow.
then I called back to the doctor's office, and fortunately, there was a different doctor on call, one that my son hadn't seen before. We've been to the same pediatrician, for his whole life. And this particular doctor, when I described it, he immediately said, that sounds like an acute onset of PANDAS. Take him to the emergency room at Vanderbilt Hospital.
Yeah, if you could just explain to our audience what PANDAS is.
PANDAS is something that I didn't even know what it was at the time. And when I looked it up, all I could find was panda bears. Upon further research, there still wasn't much there because it had just been recognized in June of that year. And it stands for Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorders Associated with Streptococcal Infections.
Right. So a kid or an adult it's mostly affects children though, right? Because it's pediatric condition.
They say that, but it's not true. But yes.
Yeah, I figure it affects a lot of adults. And so they get a strep infection. And it can also, I mean, this one specific is related to strep, but then there's also panda, I believe, or PANS that's not related to strep, right?
Right. Yes.
Okay, so then you get this viral infection, you treat it with antibiotics, and then what is happening in the body at this point?
So, I mean, just a quick recap. I had a biology and chemistry degree, and I've worked in the spa world my whole life. And so I immediately started thinking, how does strep attack a brain? And then I just jumped to rheumatic heart, and in that instance, it's, those children can never get strep again because like the body develops confused antibodies towards self tissue. And, it's a very dangerous situation. And all of a sudden I was just like, please tell me this is not happening to his brain.
Yeah, exactly. So basically the body starts to attack itself because it can't recognize the antibodies for the strep versus the antibodies, for other things in your own body tissue as well. And so then just autoimmune disorder kicks in aggressively and inflammation with that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that is, there was only one page of information on this, and PANS wasn't even identified yet. Yeah. And so there I am in the dark, and I'm just like, okay, what's the test? How are they going to know? But then, I mean, I didn't really think anything other than, the doctors will take care of them. Right. And I was like, well, hopefully they'll know because I can't find anything. So we get to the emergency room, we pull in, and I'm like, okay, we need to get him checked out for PANDAS. I mean, I didn't know what to say, And so we go in, and then unbeknownst to me, there was all this controversy swirling around this diagnosis. I wish I'd had the memo at the time, but I didn't. And so I just, blindly trusted everyone that came in the room and told them the story, and didn't realize what the psychiatrist was asking versus a neurologist versus infectious disease. And I was just answering them all. But, the funny thing is they come in and out. And so none of them get the whole story. They just ask what they want to know. They leave, and then nobody puts the whole thing together.
Yeah. And so as you were going through this, was it progressively getting worse? Because obviously you don't get the appointment the first day that you want to when you recognize you need to go. So obviously days are going by and weeks are going by. And what's happening with your son in this time?
Well, actually we did. They admitted him.
Oh, to the
emergency room. They admitted him. Neurology ordered a spinal tap and some other testing. And then, we went in, we stayed for 3 days. They ran all the tests and they came back and they were like, well, he still has strep. And so they put him on intravenous antibiotics and he got better. And I was like, okay, he still has strep. At the time, I didn't know that he also had pneumonia. And so basically he had two things. And so he gets better with this intravenous antibiotic, and then they're ready to discharge us. And I'm like, okay, so what caused the psychosis? And they're like, we don't really know. And I'm like, well, what are we going to do to find out? Well, what did you diagnose him with? What do we do? Where do we go from here? It was terrifying to leave the hospital. And you're like, okay, oh, we're going to give you some Zoloft and send him to cognitive behavioral therapy. And I'm just remember thinking, for bacteria? What? I mean, I remember just like,
so tell if you could. So crazy. So tell the audience, please, what Zoloft is. And your
Zoloft, kid's 10. And the reason I even knew what Zoloft was is my mom is a therapist, and she's been in the field forever. And so I'm very familiar with those medications. And it is an antipsychotic medication. Basically, I believe that's an SSRI. Come to find out later, I would learn that those types of medications actually suppress the immune system. Yeah. And so that's why they seemingly work temporarily. And so I thought, okay, we're going to have a talk with this strep. How's this supposed to work? And so I got upset and I said, no, I want to see the chart. Like, I want to see the diagnosis. And, they didn't want to give it to me. And I finally got it. And it said psychosis resolved NOS, like not otherwise specified. And I'm just like, that's just not good enough. And I said, did you guys run the anti-DNase B titer test? Of course, at the time I didn't know what it was, but that was the only common denominator in these kids on that website. And so they did run that, and his came back 1480, those very high titers. But unbeknownst to me at the time, that doesn't indicate necessarily group A strep, it's group B strep in the nasopharyngeal region. So of course I didn't know all of this then.
Right. So this is, and I just can't help but think about, well, being in the US and having this happen, because I lived in the US for a few years, and, with the medical system the way it is, and at the time too, that, I mean, so many people just don't have benefits to be able to cover a lot of this extended care that's needed. And so how many mothers are out there, and also they don't have a background, in chemistry, and maybe they're not going to be asking all the questions that you're going to ask. And how scary is this for a parent who just is like, has to go with what the doctors are saying?
It's terrifying. And honestly, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because it's like, I mean, I fought so hard and so long, night and day, to get to the answer. And it's just like, I hope that we can save just at least a handful of people from having to do that. Because once we were discharged, I think the pediatrician said we could go in for strep test without an appointment. I was like, that's it? That's like what's going to happen with this? So I carried him to the talk therapy and put him on the Zoloft, like they said. And he still just never got back to baseline. He just, everything was like not right. A lot of textural issues, tactile sensitivities, a lot of OCD left, but not like it was. I mean, it just never, he never got back to baseline.
Right. So then what did you do after this? What was, you went home, you had the medication, you went to talk therapy, you're doing what basically you were told to do. And what happened with your son?
Wasn't making a bit of difference. And finally, I talked to a researcher, and they're like, well, just don't, you don't have to give him the Zoloft. So we took him off the Zoloft. Didn't make a bit of difference if he was on or off. Talk therapy, it was just a time waster. So fast forward the next year, he was starting to like not get along with people more. I mean, it was just like, I started to have a lot of problems. And so the next year at the same time, it was like maybe November, this talk therapist, it's like we're on session, I don't know, 50 or whatever, and he gets sick again. And this time he's holding his stomach, his pupils get big, and he starts to hear like auditory hallucinations. That's what he was having. And so he just wasn't feeling well. And so I called the therapist and I said, this time I want to do a house visit. I don't do those. I'm like, well, this time I want you to. And so she came out and she looked at him. She's like, this child needs further medical rule outs.
Wow. And, good on you for, making the doctor come, because its context is important as well. Like being in a doctor's office for 15 minutes is not enough time to really gather any information and diagnose somebody and see them actually behaving, the way they are, because you bring your kids there and the kids are like wide-eyed because there's a stranger looking at them and asking them lots of questions. I mean, you're not going to get the same behavior response.
No.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I do sometimes wish we can go back to those days of doctor's visits and, and have people be able to truly see what's happening and have people comfortable in their own space. So I just have to say, yeah, that's amazing. So then, so what next? This is such a fascinating story.
I mean, it would be great if we could get more medical routes. But the pediatrician, I didn't realize, had taken the stance that this was just a parenting issue. But, he didn't tell me that. He should have just said, I don't believe it. I think you're probably a bad mom. That's fine, But I found it in the notes later. But I mean, I kept going to him saying something's wrong. Can you check him? And by this time I noticed, I was like, wait a minute. Okay. So the strep, he got these kind of symptoms. I mean, they were just like next level. But then he would have these little bouts of ups and downs. And I could always tell because he would get like 4 or 5 bus referrals in a week, or it would just be all of a sudden, I was like, wait a minute, it's almost like he's going up and down with other things besides just strep, And so I just started observing everything. And the other kids in the house, we had a really tough time there for a while. And we muddled through to the point where things were getting really bad though. And I thought, it seems to me that there's viruses or molds or something in the food, something, but whatever it is, some of them last like a day, some last like 3 or 4 days, some can last 2 weeks. I was like, there's no rhyme or reason to any of this. And so without any help from a medical professional, I called a few of the pediatricians and got online a lot, and all the other moms that had children with PANDAS were having the same issues. And so I found a test online from Molecular Labs called the Cunningham Panel, and I asked him to order that, and he fired us.
What?
Fired us. He fired us. He
Your
said,
pediatrician fired you.
pediatrician fired me
Yeah.
for asking for a test. I'd asked for a test a year before and let it go. I was like, can we just run the anti-DNA speak? No, there's no need. I'm like, well, I don't get it. I mean, I'll write the check for it. It's $115. You won't write the
Yeah.
order. I just feel like we were in prison. So anyway, he got strep a second time. And when he got strep the second time, so fast forward, we're at 8th grade this time. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. He got it from a housekeeper, and it went overnight again. She called and she was like, I just want to let you know I've got strep. And I was like, oh gosh. Within a few
hard.
hours, he's like green and turns into like literally a completely different child that's possessed. And I'm just like, how is this possible? I mean, he instantly became horrendously mean. Like, and I
Yeah.
didn't realize at the time it was oppositional defiance disorder. But I was like, so this next strep infection took us to a whole new level, and
Yeah.
things just got more bizarre and more bizarre. And after the pediatrician had fired me, very, like, okay, I mean, I'm open-minded. If it is a parenting issue, I will, try to correct that. I don't know how much more organized I can become, but I'll give it a shot. So I got that total transformation program. I don't
Yeah.
know if you've ever seen it by James Lehman. And so for like the last 12 months, we've been like giving out rewards and so we'd had game night, reading night. I
Yeah.
quit work basically entirely to stay home. And even after all that, he gets strep and just overnight. And I just thought, okay, this is insane. Well, this next time he got strep, things went south really fast. And what I know now, he started to get these like compulsions that he could not fight. And he was doing things that we ended up in the juvenile court system,
Hmm.
involved with a
Of
judge.
course, though, of course, because when you have inflammation in the brain, I mean, you just think about somebody take away all the health issues, all the strep, all the autoimmune, all the everything. And, some people get a headache and they become snappy and, they can, yell out and do all of that, or they become depressed, like even just from something as tiny as a headache, because the minute your brain is impacted, it's so hard to make any decisions. But now you have this chronic brain inflammation that's happening as a result of the autoimmune disorder, and your body's attacking the tissue, of course. And I imagine for different kids it's going to present, I imagine, differently depending on where in the brain that you have the excessive inflammation and swelling.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's many panda symptoms. In fact, I think it's, probably far more common than we even acknowledge at this point.
Oh,
Um,
100%, especially with the amount of antibiotics that are prescribed, where now we just have, super bugs and the body is just riddled. And, we haven't even gotten into talking about the microbiome or anything like that, but I'm sure that's going to come up. But yeah, of course. So here you are. Now, how many years has this been going on for now as you're trying to figure this out?
three,
Right.
4 years. I
These are
mean,
such important times.
there's
Yeah.
such important times. And then I had two other children, and I had a teenager too. So just, it grieves my heart, but it's like, okay, so what do you do with that? It's like, okay, so it was just mass chaos a lot of the times. And it really wasn't anything that you could put your finger on. I mean, yeah, there'd been a divorce, but I'm sorry, there's a lot of children that have divorced parents that don't drive cars often, and
Yeah.
so, but it just became, when he would get something in his head, it would get stuck there. Like if he was watching something, and the way that I finally figured out, I was like, okay, so it's whatever he's doing or thinking about at the time, the inflammation, really like is exacerbated. That he stays stuck in that realm
Hmm.
throughout until the inflammation is brought down. But, you know, um, I'm just watching in horror as all these things happen. And, we'd been so in the total transformation program, they encourage you to support the school, and so I did, and made really like best friends with the assistant principal. I don't know if she would say that, but was out there 27 times, like support. There's really nothing left to do in terms of like rules and disciplinary. And I just, well, what's next? And these things that he's doing, none of them are really like horrible things. They're just like he gets stuck on something and he won't stop. But it's the 1, 2, 3 and you're out thing.
Yeah.
And she goes, well, we file unruly petitions and go in front of the judge. I'm like, you know. So anyway, there we are. We ended up in front of the judge. Of course, I think, okay, this could become a win-win because maybe the judge could order the test we need, the anti-DNA speed. So I'm trying to explain to this judge, and now he's even almost like worse than the doctors, looking at me like I've got 3 heads. Fortunately, his dad was there with me. So we went to the psychiatrist that had actually been trying to help, that got us to the talk therapy and was given the Zoloft 3 years earlier. And she actually agreed to order the PANDAS test.
Oh, good.
She ordered the PANDAS test and it came back positive. And so we had been fired by the pediatrician's office, but we had a 30-day window for acute care. And so I called up and I was like, my child has PANDAS and I would like him taken care of. And so I took it in and we saw a different doctor, the same doctor that referred us 3 years earlier. And he put him right away on antibiotics and he immediately started to get better. I mean, he slowly started to get better. It was very slow because it was Keflex. And, he'd been infected for so long, far too long without treatment. So it just, he just a little bit at a time. But the problem was we were already in that groove of the juvenile court system, which is like a whole other travesty in and of itself. And so those judges put all these rules on you. They don't care if you have a medical issue. They don't care. It's just like, and they give you this list of rules of things that like you didn't think to take away their cell phone, but for him to take away all of his electronics was, I mean, brutal. And it put us in a lot of danger because I didn't have anything to keep his mind off of what was going on. And we didn't have, so it was a nightmare. It was just horrible. And by this time, I realized, and everybody's telling me, okay, if he's really had this for this long without any treatment, he's in bad shape. And so he needs to go to an expert and get intravenous immunoglobulin. So make an appointment with Dr. Latimer up in Washington, D.C. We can't get in for 6 months. So I'm supposed to keep this child safe who's in all this trouble. It was probably one of the worst times of my life. And I mean, we were locking doors, screwing down everything. And it still, I mean, it was like he had this capability that he should never have had at that age, things that he was doing that he'd never seen or heard of. And I was just like, how it's almost like, and as a scientist too, I'm like, it's like he's got access to a part of his brain that he shouldn't have access to and that nobody else has access to. And I'm thinking now the inflammation, pressing on parts of the brain, activating things that really aren't supposed to be activated. I mean, because he knew, I mean, anyway, I couldn't stay ahead of him. So we finally make it up to the Maryland, and he gets the treatment and we leave and $18,000. Of course, like by this time I'm not working, I'm paying lawyers, I'm paying these medical fees that I really shouldn't have had to. And then we get back home, but before we left the doctor's office, she said he's going to get worse before he gets better. And I just remember crying like silently because he's so hopeful. This was going to fix him. So we got all the way back home and I didn't tell him, but he did. He got worse and ended up back in the juvenile detention center that very night, that dirty cell. He took my car and he wrecked it. And so he ended up back in there. And this time, she just was ready to lock the door and throw away the key. And so the lawyers were like, well, you've got to get him into a treatment facility. But the only treatment facilities your insurance will pay for is behavioral health because they're psych symptoms, but it's a medical etiology. And so I was like, I don't want him to go to a psych place and get all psychiatric medications and not get the medical treatment he needs. And so it was so difficult to navigate that. And we found this one place in Carbondale. It was like a neuro rehabilitation center and they agreed to take him. And the judge was letting him out to go do an interview. So we went up to do the interview, but she said, you got to be back by 9 p.m. We weren't going to make it back by 9. The clinical interview was like 4 hours. And she said, and if you don't, you're in contempt of court. Basically, you're going to jail. So it just became like all of this pressure of like, I'm going to jail because I can't figure out what's wrong with him and I've got nobody helping. And so that really lit a fire onto me because we ended up going back. And because we were late against the court order, she threw him in solitary confinement
Oh
and
my goodness.
left him there for 5 weeks. In
What?
a 5 weeks
How old
in
was he?
barely 13, just turned 14.
This is so criminal because of the fact that we actually do have the knowledge around this. We have the information. We just need to have teams coming together and, working on this to know how the mind works with nutrition, works with psychiatric drugs, works with, things like strep viruses and all different types of viruses. I mean, the information is out there, and it's, we need this trans or interdisciplinary gatherings where the ego is gone, where it's like, I'm no longer a specialist, but this is what I know. And tell me, what do you know? And what do you know, from all the different specialties coming together? And then leaving it to the justice system is, we need people who definitely are involved in those meetings so that they can explain from their standpoint, like, listen, our hands are tied, this is what we have to do. But they also understand this interrelationship between, like I said, the diet, the medication, the virus, the, somebody who's a PANDAS expert, and, and at the time too, when it's new information, I get that, but just people who are wanting to find a solution like you were.
Well, and I just thought, I was so naive at the time because I owned a business my whole life.
Yeah.
And I just thought that like juvenile court was a place for resources. And that's what the officer said. There's lots of help, there's lots of support there. But I get there and it's not. I quickly ascertained that it was just a dirty business. Just to be perfectly blunt, it was just like, what is your motive? Like, where there's no help for these kids, you're locking them up, you're shipping them off to facilities. It was just like, I wish I'd never seen it, but then again, I knew I had to see it to believe it.
And also to probably learn about it so that you can help people. Like, people will know that they might be like you. No, the justice system is there to support us. I've heard so many people say that, like, why would you ever doubt it? It's built for us, but it's not really at all. And so you needed to see the inside of it in a way so that you can help other people understand that you really want to stay as far away from that as you possibly can.
You want to do everything and anything to stay away from that system.
Wow.
And so ultimately, I think it was that the judge basically thought I was going to file suit because of the fact that he had this medical diagnosis and the neurologist had diagnosed him and treated him with IVIG, and he was on antibiotics, which he needed to stay on. And she wouldn't let him go back to the neurologist. She only wanted him to go to a psychiatrist. And I'm like, wait a minute. So now you're manipulating everything so that you can get the diagnoses to fit him for this facility in this division of the insurance. Anyway, I'll move on from that because they tried to take custody from me, because at that point, if they could put him in his father's custody, then I wouldn't be able to take any action. So they managed to remove all my medical decision-making rights, they thought. But
and what did your ex-husband, what was he thinking about all this at the time?
He kind of got caught up in the fear.
Right.
He got caught up in the fear, and that's what everybody does. It's like, we've got to do what they say. And me, I'm like, well, you know what? We've got two options. We can do what they say and lose our child forever, or we can defy them and maybe have a chance at him living. So I think I'm going to go with B.
Yeah, of course.
I'll take B.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and then they want you to sign these petitions admitting you've done things, but they say they're helping, but I didn't sign any of it. And that made them really mad. So long story short, I had to jump from medical to court for about 3-month period. And I went through 2 or 3 lawyers, but you don't realize they all know each other. I did finally find one lawyer that was able to, get everything dropped and dismissed. And I got custody back of him. And then I thought, Elizabeth, if you don't figure this out, you're going to lose him and it's going to be over. And so the pressure was on because I was like, now he had PTSD from being in a cell.
Of
And
course.
so now I'm like, you got PTSD, which the symptoms overlaps somewhat with a panda. So how am I supposed to tease all this out to know what's what? And now you really do need a therapist and a psychiatrist, whereas before you didn't. And it was easy for me to see it. Now I've got this like complex situation. So I mean, I just, honestly, I just only listened to myself, and I just prayed, for
Yeah.
guidance. And I just followed the little breadcrumbs that I thought everything I heard, like I would hear one thing in a whole lecture and I would like, okay, that applies to me. But when they did try to take medical decision making away, I went to Atlanta and to a conference, a PANDAS conference, and found a different PANDAS doctor. And the minute that it was real hard to get in with him, but I stood up there and waited. And he said, okay, I'll take him on. The minute that I got him, I took him straight to the lab and we ran like 37 vials of blood. And I took him back to his dad. I was like, don't tell anybody, like we're going to get this figured out. And so by the time I got him back, the results were in, and he was like, this pediatric neurologist, his name is Dr. Trifoletti. I credit him for a lot of this because, he just said, wow, his strep pneumo titers were off the charts. That's nasal, strep in the nose. And then he also had some anti-thyroid antibodies. And I was like, okay. I was like, but there's a lot going on here. So we would just sporadically do more tests and meetings. And then I had to, come up with a funding somehow for all this
Yeah,
because
I was going to ask you.
it's not covered by insurance.
Wow.
And then so we're going over this summer, and the pressure is just like full court press. And so I'm like, okay, there's one more thing we got to rule out, and that's genes. Like, what if this is some schizophrenia that got, triggered by the trauma in addition to the PANDAS? I need to know, is there two things? And so we did this extensive genetic testing, and he didn't have a single thing he'd been diagnosed with. He didn't have the gene for ADHD, didn't have the gene for OCD, he didn't have it for, oh, by this time he had 27 diagnoses. I was like, this is just not, and not to have the gene, he didn't even have the gene for an autoimmune disease. And I look at it and this is a massive test. It took me 3 days to digest it. And then he went over it with me and he was like, well, there's, downline, like this would be something that if the condition's right, when he's 40 or 50, there's like one questionable thing, but the proteins weren't there that would indicate it had been triggered. So ruled that out. So it's like, okay, good news and bad news. It's all environmental.
Yeah.
We know that.
Exactly.
But I don't know what it is.
Wow.
And I've literally tried everything, and I don't have my own prescription pad.
Oh my God. So and you have 3 kids at home that need you, and
3 kids at home that need me. And I will say that is the summer where I just started like, okay, so my adopted kids they came to me from DCS. And when we got them, they were supposed to have all kinds of crazy stuff. Sweetest kids you would ever meet. Just the great kids, never any problems. But that particular summer, they started acting in different ways than they'd acted before. And you think it's the trauma and all the stress. And that's what I'm dismissing everything as. Like my 14-year-old is hormones, and my, other son, he's just scared of everything, wants to hide in his room. Until my daughter, Michelle, in the book, she comes down and she's like, "Well, my ear really hurts." And she leans forward and she's got this big red boil behind her ear. And I was like, this is contagious. Whatever this is contagious. And I'm like, okay. And by this time, she was slamming doors at me. She was staying up all night. She was having a high heart rate. So oppositional defiance disorder. Of course, we've been referred to the therapist. We've been going to the therapist. I got all 3 kids going to all the therapists when they really just needed to be in the doctor. So I go into the doctor and I'm like, and they have a different doctor, thank gosh. He didn't think I was crazy yet. And I'm like, so can we take the boil and culture it and send it off? Because I'm thinking, okay, this could be a clue for everything,
Yeah.
He's like, well, really not going to do that. I'm thinking, why? Yeah. Why are we not going to do that? But anyway, he did write her antibiotics for the boil. And as the boil went down, her attitude of sweet, kind, loving, just her baseline attitude also returned.
So
And I thought,
there are so many things here that are just so incredible about your story. I almost think that because you have so much knowledge, because you are a scientist and you study chemistry and biology and everything, that I have, like, I know that for myself too, because I have a science background. Sometimes when I go into doctors' offices and I ask for things, they immediately write me off because they think I Googled it. It's so degrading. It's terrible. I've had doctors say you ask too many questions, but I'm like, I'm the one who diagnosed my daughter with meningitis, not you guys, not 17 doctors who missed it. And then they still say I asked too many questions. And this is the part that absolutely needs to change somehow in the system. And I get it's hard because some people might be hypochondriacs and some people might have Munchausen's or some, but I mean, that's so few and far between than just the mother who absolutely just wants to get to the root cause of their kid's condition. And sometimes it's probably a good idea to listen to the mother. And I've had doctors call me back and say, we are so sorry. We never listened to you. You taught us a vital lesson. We need to also just listen. It is probably one of the most important things. And this is why I think narrative medicine needs to be brought into the entire medical system, because it's the person's collective story. It's everything in context. It's understanding that you have a loving, sweet daughter. She gets a boil behind her ear. Her behavior changed. Like, that needs to be considered in the context of your son as well.
absolutely,
So
absolutely. And
what
so
was the boil? Can I ask, like, what,
I,
what?
so 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 that's when I start thinking, okay, this is contagious. Well, I haven't been to this part of the story yet, but maybe a year or two before my son came down with his acute onset, I started having symptoms of my own. Mine was just, it was hand tingling, I mean, it was all things that could be written off by stress and
Mhm.
working a lot. And I mean, but I mean, I'd wake up and they were numb, and I'd gotten like a little pinky break. And so over the course of the 5 years, he's diagnosed with PANDAS. I'm ultimately diagnosed with complex regional pain syndrome. My muscle is just like wasting. I'm losing weight. I'm like down to 123, but I don't have any big boil. And I'm just thinking, okay, so wait, and I'm not putting it together until I'm like, my wrist won't bend. I'm having nerve blocks by now. I'm on pain meds and Lyrica. I mean, the medications that we were all on, I mean, probably $1,000 a month with that was the copay, you know?
Wow.
And it's like, okay, this makes no sense. And I just stopped and I thought to myself, okay, I've worked out my whole life. I've got basically a master's in sports medicine. I've eaten right. I've raised the kids right. They've had a stable home. There's been some ups and downs, but I mean, for the most part, nothing explains this. And so I went and I thought, nobody's going to be able to help me. So I scheduled appointments with all of the specialists myself, rather than, because I kept trying to go through the pediatrician. Well, can you schedule us with this person, schedule us that person? You don't have to do that. I scheduled with the immunologist. I scheduled, once I had those lab numbers, I built this monstrous spreadsheet. And I just like put all the abnormalities in. And every time that he would send updated labs, the spreadsheet would get larger. And so then I had this idea. So I moved all that to a different tab. I went and I got his medical record since birth, like back in the vault. And I mean,
Yeah.
it took me forever to collect them, but you can get a full legal medical record. And so they were all shipped in, and I'm sitting there with this huge binder, and he's like bouncing off the walls. I'm like, I don't have much time to figure this out. I'm in horrific pain, but I've tabled mine because I'm like, I got to figure him out. Um, so I'm reading his record from the time he was a baby, and I don't know all the words, but I'm looking them
Yeah.
up, so it takes me a ridiculously long amount of time. But come to find out, I realized that like this little thing that he'd had not wasn't so little when he was a baby, he had never gotten rid of this organism. And I'm like, okay, because as I laid the timeline out and I wrote it all out, and I noticed that he was treated with Zithromax, but it came back. And it was treated with something else, but then it went to double pneumonia. Then he was hospitalized. And it was
Mhm.
just like on and on and on. And so then you flip the story and you start reading it like a book. And you read it like when he's young, 3, 4, 5, 6, he has all this like just horrible coughing and all these descriptions of the coughing. And then about the third grade, it stopped being physical symptoms and started becoming hyperactivity, OCD, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was like this, the immune system just tipped. And I was like, so he's got a resistance something that nothing's worked on, and it's taken hold of him, and this is where we are. What do we do now? So I start looking at superbugs. I'm like, okay, it's a superbug. So I'm researching superbug, and the first thing that pops up is 19A, which is a strain of Streptococcal pneumoniae. And I'm not sure how familiar you are, but the Prevnar vaccine that came out in 2000, the Prevnar 7 covered like the 7 most virulent strains, but then others emerged. The doctors didn't recognize the symptoms. So when Prevnar 13 came out in 2010. So goodness knows, but one of these strains was resistant to all antibiotics other than Levaquin. So my son, I'm like, I found it. We need Levaquin. It's just, we just haven't had the right antibiotic. And so I'm like, I'm done with doctors. I'm calling the CDC. So I call the CDC and I'm like, my son has a resistant strain. I've got the labs right here. I did have that lab. His 19 is really high. It's resistant. He needs Levaquin. She goes, print that off and take it into your doctor.
Okay, so hold on 1 second. So I just need to, this is too much for me. This is just the fact. I mean, they made a movie, The Brain That Changes Itself. Do you know this story?
No.
Oh, you just have to watch it because I think it'll just hit home to you. And I talk about this all the time. And it's a Times journalist. She's young, she's in her 20s, and very much the same thing happens to her. I don't know if it's the same strain, I don't know what it is, but she basically goes from being this incredible journalist to complete psychosis in almost a psychiatric ward, but in neurology first, but everyone was trying to transfer her to the psychiatric department. But the parents said, no way. We know my daughter does not have psychosis. We know it's something else. You don't go from functioning well and thriving in society to literally, she was pulling out her hair. She was catatonic. She was speaking in tongues, all of this. And so she wrote this beautiful book. It's called The Brain That Changes Itself. And, it's called Brain on Fire. The Brain That Changes Itself is also another really great book. Brain on Fire. And, and it really came down. It was one doctor who ran one test with a piece of paper and a pencil. I won't wreck the story for you. Piece of paper and a pencil. That's all it took for him to be able to diagnose her, after every other psychiatrist, neuroscientist completely just wanted to write her off as being either schizophrenic or extreme bipolar, or and that's all. One drug. It took her 2 years to learn how to walk and talk again after this happened, but now she's thriving again and helping millions of people around the world. So I think you and her need to become really good friends, because you are cut from the same cloth. No, you are feisty. Well, her parents and you, actually, because her parents never gave up. And your story, I mean, I really just want to, I don't know what I want to do. I want to give you the biggest hug right now. But I just cannot imagine. I can't imagine how hard that was. I've gone through, we have our own stories with our oldest daughter. But here you are with spreadsheets, 4 children at home. All of you have all these different symptoms. You're in chronic pain. I just want to paint this picture for people. You are going back and getting every single medical record, known to human, around your son, which is the number one thing I tell all of my clients to do. You have to get a copy of every single lab result, every single record from every single doctor's appointment. You keep those in a binder, and you keep those because one day you will need to do exactly what you did. You'll need to go back, you'll need to create a spreadsheet, and you'll need to start to see a pattern, because that's how you will end up diagnosing yourself when everybody else misses it. All the specialists, the experts, everybody in the world will miss it. You will be able to find it. And that's exactly what you did, which is just amazing. So I just need to ask a question. So going back, this one particular strain he had when he was a baby. Is that correct? Or
That is, yep, that's where I was. That's where I was at the story, in this part of the story. And I was just like, okay, it's got to be 19A because he's never had Levaquin. He's had all these other things. So we need 19A. But then I start like having all these second thoughts of like, well, it's been there for like 13 years. And if I, manage to acquire some Levaquin, how much do I need to kill it? And am I going to make the other things resistant within him?
yeah,
Just like, am I going to make it worse? And then I'm like, well, how can it get any worse? It can't get any worse. Just go get the Levaquin.
right.
So I'm like, we drive to a different emergency room. And by this time, I'm like learning the thing, which is sad. I'm like, okay, do say this, don't say that. Because by this time, he's hoarding medical supplies. That was one of his big things. That he's not stealing. And I'm like, so I'm like walking in, I'm like, if he laughs at you, it's loud ball emotions. He's not really laughing at you. If he takes the medical supplies, I'll give him back. It's not really stealing, it's hoarding. And you just hear yourself and you're like, oh yeah. But the common denominator is every time he was like through the roof, and it wasn't group based strep, this area was so red up around his eye, around this area. It was so red. I thought, okay, I'm looking for clues. And so, he didn't have a runny nose. He didn't have sore throat, nothing. And so this physician's assistant, I'm like, I hand him the spreadsheet. I have 19A circled. I hand him the document from the CDC. And I'm like, can you please give Levaquin? And he's like, you want me to give your son something that could rupture his tendons? And I was like, well, that's better than solitary confinement for 5 weeks if it works. So yes, let's give it a shot, please. He just looks at me
Wow.
and he's like, okay, this mom is serious. And
Yeah.
he starts to examine him and he says, your son has a raging sinus infection. And I'm like, he does? And I'm like, huh. But he's doesn't act like he has, he's not blowing his nose, nothing that comes with a sinus infection. His sinus infection looks like, I broke my toe on a construction. I joined a new crew and I'm learning how to frame. And I met these, I was like, oh, that's the sinus infection look like. And so we get the Levaquin. I'm like, okay, think about this. So we go to the pharmacist. I'd met all these people on the journey. And there was this one really smart pharmacist, and he didn't seem to think I was too crazy. And I hadn't asked him too many questions. So I go in there and I stand there and I'm like, okay, so I'm going to give him Levaquin. Will it snap his tendons? And he goes, no, he's the size of a grown man. And then I'm thinking, okay, so we go home. And we've had this experience now where we've had little bouts with antibiotics, and every single one of them did something different. But he always got better. But he got better, and then he'd get worse. And I was like, what is that all about? I didn't understand it. And so I went home. I'm like, okay, well, maybe this is the right antibiotic. And I start to learn that all antibiotics are not created equally, and that
Mm-hmm.
there's all multiple classes, and that they target different pathogens with different mechanisms of action. And some are bactericidal, some are bacteriostatic and don't even kill anything. They just prevent replication. Some interrupt gut flora, some don't. Because I'm reading all this stuff before I give it to him. And I got to tell you, I gave him that Levaquin, and within 2 days, he was the most peaceful I'd ever seen him in years. And I was just like, it's gonna work. It's gonna work. Then on day 3, he just like explosive rages. And I was like, okay, I know this is the right answer. Just don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. What could be doing this? I'm looking it up and I'm like, what happens when bacteria die? He's clearly got a lot of them now. Well, they
Yeah.
give off ammonia. And so
Right.
I'm like, okay, so ammonia is probably not good for him. There's probably a lot of it. So I put him in an Epsom salt bath and he calms right down. And so I'm like, okay, I don't understand any of this. And I don't have anybody to tell me. And it seems like it's going to be very dangerous. So we finish up the Levaquin, and then within a week, it's back. And I'm like, oh,
What?
and this time he's out in the lab in the garage making this like lab. Now he's decided he's going to help me. He's got enough of his brain back to figure out he's going to help me. And he's like basically getting dirt samples out of the yard. He just somehow got a lab coat. And I'm like, and it's cute, but then you're like, it's coming back,
Yeah, of
Then you
course.
go to the kitchen and the refrigerator is like perfect. And you're like, where's all the food? And I'm like,
Oh,
okay. So then I'm like, I need more Levaquin, so now I'm on this mission for Levaquin, which is hard to get. It's harder to get that stuff than pain pills. And I'm like,
Wow.
it's so hard to get antibiotics, which you can get hydrocodone.
Yeah.
So anyway, I started looking, and I'm like, okay, this 19A. And then I'll pick up his labs again. And I'm like, okay, so maybe it's the 19A plus something else. Maybe that's part of the equation. This has got to be a complex math problem.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking through the first set of labs and I see again, mycoplasma pneumonia. Of course, my brain's been on streptococcus pneumonia.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, he did have mycoplasma pneumonia infection. And I'm like, what is and I just start like going off, like, I've not looked into that. I need to look into that. These are both pneumonias. So I start looking into it and I literally can find nothing on this organism, which by this time I'm like getting in kind of deep to things. I've seen how the court system works and I've seen how the doctors won't give me what I need and how I'm learning how I have to like basically manipulate is what you would call it from psychiatric standpoint, but you'd call it strategy from business standpoint.
Totally.
I'm getting all strategic, like I'm learning things I'd never thought I'd have to know. And so I'm starting to really question a lot of things at this point. I really am starting to question a lot of things because looking through all these diseases, I see that they can cause all these things that we've never been told they could cause, and these people don't get tested for this when they have this. So I'm like, mycoplasma pneumonia, looking and there's like literally nothing except for in India. And you look and it's like this intracellular organism. You can get inside of your cells. And I'm like, and it causes pneumonia. Well, I'm like, I need more information about this. And why is there nothing here? And so I thought, I've called all the doctors and I literally had called like 50 of them or gone to 50 of them by now, everywhere, the whole country. And I'm like, I got to think differently. I'm like, I haven't called a researcher.
Right.
So I called the research department at Vanderbilt. I'm like, I've got some questions. I'm studying, this intracellular organism. I've got some questions for the person that's researching it. And this guy answers the phone and I couldn't believe he picked up. Those are the signs you get when you're like, okay, this might be the right path.
Yeah.
And he tells me, he's like, listen, the only person in this entire country that studies this organism is Dr. Garth Nicholson. And I'm like, okay, where is he?
Yeah.
He's like, he's in California. And I'm like, okay, I'll call, make an appointment. So I hang up before I ask enough questions. So pull up him and I find his website. It's imed.org. And I start reading and the website's really outdated. And I'm like, okay, how do we schedule an appointment? We'll fly there, drive there, whatever. And I'm like, okay, he doesn't see patients. And I start clicking on the links and it's like, the reason the name jumped out to me so much was because he's the scientist that discovered the phospholipid membrane of the cell.
Wow.
Nicholson. And I learned that back when I was in biochemistry, when I was getting my degree, 25 years ago.
Yeah.
When biochemistry used to just be biochemistry. I'll tell you about that later. And so I'm like, I knew his name. And so I'm reading it and I start to read the stories and I just like start crying because I'm like, I immediately know that what he's saying is true because what happened was they were manipulating a mycoplasma organism, genetically modifying this organism down in like the early 1980s. And they took a strain of Mycoplasma fermentans, they genetically modified it, and they tested it on the death row inmates in the Texas prison systems in the town of Huntsville. Okay. So this is the DOJ, Baylor, and Army Pathology Lab. There's even a patent for it. And I'm reading it, and I'm not wanting to believe it's true, but I'm reading it. These people that were infected with the Mycoplasma fermentans, they were also co-infected with Mycoplasma pneumonia. And because of genetic transference, the pathogenicity, transferred over to this organism. And so it had been modified to become heat resistant. Couldn't be killed by fevers. It was more virulent. It was antibiotic resistant. It was created to be antibiotic resistant.
This is crazy.
I know. I hate to be the one to have to tell everybody this, but it's the truth. And so basically I don't think that they intentionally meant to infect the people of this town, but because that happened, the rate of MS ALS and rheumatoid arthritis was 5,000% higher than anywhere else in the country, in
That's,
this little town of Huntsville, Texas. And so Garth Nicholson's telling the story. And I'm just like thinking to myself, I know what he has.
yes.
Because back in 2003, we let my brother-in-law come stay with us to get back on his feet. And he had been in a rehab that was connected with the Texas prison system. And I remember as I read about what happened, how you get it, how it can be contracted, I was just sitting there and I couldn't believe it because, you know, when you're you've direct exposure to this organism at that level, you get sick. And I mean, when he moved in with us, the first like week later, we all got deathly sick with this, like what people describe COVID. We couldn't breathe. I mean, it's
Yeah.
horrible. And of course, the same pediatrician was like, it's just the flu. Of course it is. Then we ended
Yes.
up getting huge boils all over us, huge boils, like everywhere, all of us. Come to find out it was MRSA. But at that time, nobody knew what it was.
And
I
this
ended up
was all when your son was a baby.
as a baby.
Wow.
And so I just thought back and I thought, oh my gosh. And then I thought, and I just cried for 3 days because nobody wants to hear that you're infected with a bioweapon that's like resistant and it's can't be killed by fevers. And then B, it just makes you grieve your whole life because like the
Yeah.
symptoms slowly come on. All the kids had slowly started to get symptoms. My ex-husband had slowly started to get symptoms that looked different than mine. Of course, we all think it's this, but none of us were looking at the right thing. My
Mhm.
brother-in-law by this time is dead, multi-organ system failure. He's gone to live with every single person in the family. All of them have gotten every kind of autoimmune disease you can imagine. And ones like I remember, like 2005, Alström malformation, ulcers, every single brain cancer, spinal cancer, every suicide, three suicides, like while he kind of lived with them. And I'm just like, and then I'm like, then I look at my housekeeper and my the instructors that came to my house earlier, and I was just like, the guilt was incredible,
I
and then the
bet.
fear just to stay alive was even like I was like, so we're just gonna die. We might as well just. I was like, okay, so okay.
And
So I
how does
sat there
it
for.
spread? Is it respiratory?
Mhm.
Oh, wow.
It's
So it's kind
airborne.
of like a, you know, very slow acting COVID over many decades, basically.
Takes 9 to 18 months to even start seeing the symptoms when you've contracted it. Like this is an insidious weapon of
So
mass destruction.
how many people in North America or the US potentially have this?
Everyone has some strain of it by now, I
Right.
venture to say. Because this was 1980 when it happened. And if you go back, and I just started like, my brain was just honestly, I think my autoimmune was intellect because I think I was thinking that way. And I
Yeah.
had like 15 TVs on, and I was like, wait, I saw this here, I saw this there. And I
Yeah.
mean, you should see, I've kept all the research, it's rooms and rooms full connecting the dots. And I was like, okay, so okay, we're infected with it. 3 days later, I'm crying. I'm like, I'm not going to tell the kids. I don't know how to tell anybody. You know, I did before my brother-in-law died. I did have a chance to call him and talk to him. We'd kind of
Yeah.
gotten estranged, and I just said, you know, hey, I want to talk to you about when you were down at that rehab. He was only smoking weed at the time. Later, he's doing meth, and I mean, I'm just like, no wonder. And so he
Yeah.
tells me that they were sick down there. They did give him a Z pack. They told him all it was some kind of pneumonia. And I was like, okay. But still, even though you hear this wild story and you're like, I know this is what it is, you still want proof, you
Yeah, of
know?
course.
And
Yeah.
nobody would test me for mycoplasma because we didn't have pneumonia. And I called all the doctors again. No, no, no. But Dr. Nicholson said that pets get it. And when he said that, I was like, wait a minute. We adopted a dog last year who we brought home, immediately got all this reverse sneezing and then went crazy. So I was like, I'm going to take this dog to the vet and I'm going to ask for him to test. So I did. And the vet was like, this is not the answer to your family's problems. I was like, you know what, it's probably not. And that's fine. I said, it'll just help me sleep better tonight. Dogs don't get this. I mean, I took a lashing, and I just like, whatever, please, please. But, beggars can't, so I took the little test top tube, the red test top tube, and I was like, here's the paper. I've already checked the box. This is the lab. Here's the check. I'll pick it up and ship it. Could you just do the thing in the dog's nose? I don't know how to do that. And so he did it. And he called me 2 weeks later and he was like, I don't know how to tell you this. Your dog was positive for mycoplasma pneumonia. And I was like,
Wow.
because he too had gone nuts and had ticks. And I was just like, I can't do this. So then I knew, I was like, okay, so then this guy's story checks out. This guy, this brilliant scientist, some guy. And so then I'm like, okay, so then his protocol would work.
Right.
Because by this I'd read enough. So I download this protocol and it's like, it's intense. And I'm like, we got to take all these kinds of antibiotics for this many years. And I'm like, I can't even get a week's worth. How am I going to do this?
Exactly.
So I come in here to one of my clients and she's like, oh, you can order those online without a prescription. And I'm like, what? So I fly up to the front and I'm like, order online without a prescription. And I'm like, so there I am. I'm like, I'm either going to make the house payment or I'm going to get us cured if this guy's really right and this protocol is really right. And I'm like,
oh my gosh.
B. I'm always thinking B.
Yeah.
Let the house go. I'm like, we live at the shop. Let's just do. So all this stuff comes in. It takes like 3 weeks. And the mailman's like, what you doing, Elizabeth? I'm like, nothing. I lay everything out. Of course, I take everything first to make sure it's not poisoned or something. All the stories we hear. And I'm like, it was great. And I learned about the Herxheimer response.
Yeah.
And then I learned that like you got to do Benadryl or you got to do charcoal, but it was a lot of trial and error and it was a lot of mistakes, and it was a lot of symptoms coming back that it was a lot of things that I could have done better if I just had somebody to tell me what to do,
So I just have to stop here because all this is happening and you're this, for lack of another word, like literally like a mad scientist in your laboratory, like being like, and your brain is going off and you're figuring all this out. Did you have any support? Like, were friends thinking that you're off the deep end? What was happening in your own personal life? Because I cannot, and did you have a partner to support you? Like, what was happening?
I had nobody. I was like, nope. I was just like, everybody pretty much distanced themselves. And I was like, I don't even care.
Yeah.
Like I was at that point, like, I don't even care. I don't care if you like me. I mean, to my own family, I was like, I don't care. I think it's like that survival thing that kicks in.
Yeah.
And something happens where you just disconnect from everything other than living. Yeah. And it's like, I think it protects you from all the emotional, distractions. I did have my clients and there was a few of them that stayed. And a lot of them stayed, but a few of them that I would talk to. And I had one really smart client and she was a psychiatrist. And she said, I heard a professor say when I was back getting her PhD at 1970, that one day the field of psychology and neurology will collide. And she said encouraging words to me. And that's all I needed. I just needed one sentence from one person.
Exactly. Because it's lonely when you're out in the world, like researching this stuff and you're second guessing yourself. And then you need to prove it to yourself because, you need to have something to be able to speak about. So here you're gathering, it's not just gathering the evidence, it's almost gathering up the history, the everything, so that you can justify what, because other people will be like, well, the specialists would know about this, or aren't there like, medical practitioners and researchers and scientists out there who've been studying this for 30 years that would know about this. So who are you to discover this on your own? So then you have that side, I imagine, that's coming in, but you're like so deeply motivated because it's not just your son, it's your entire family and extended family.
My entire family, my extended family. And I'm just like, okay. And my first thought was before I took the antibiotic, I'm like, so I'm probably not really this smart. Take the pill. Things are going to slow down. And I need to just like, for the next few months, I need to get as much done as I can, because I'm sure I'd started putting it all together. And I was like, this is not normal, and I can't really stay up for 3 days normally. And, I'm just doing this, out of this adrenaline or whatever. And so I just spent the next 3 to 6 months, like you said, documenting everything, pulling everything together where I could still think of it, writing
Yeah.
the doctor's appointments down. And I just spent that first 6 months doing that while I was trying to get them better, and I knew because every time we'd switch the antibiotic, I mean, they would have, I mean, it would be just like classic honeymoon period. Then we would have the die off, and then the die off would end. And I was just like, and like eventually they all got better.
Wow. They all got better. And now, had you formed a relationship with Dr. Garth Nicholson?
Yeah, I called him a lot. I emailed him, hey, is this, I call him, I'm like, I just read your website. Is this PANDAS? Is this PANDAS? He's like, I haven't heard that this is PANDAS. I just want you to know, just let you know, it's also PANDAS. Well, he just came out with something in 2019 that says PANDAS. And I'm like, okay, good. So it's
Okay.
like, yeah. And so I just started, but, and asking all my clients the questions. They've been coming for years. So I'd heard all their family stories and then at the end of the day, we just all, ended up getting better and not having such a traumatic life, because like our animals always died early. Our employees always like went crazy. It's just like, and so
Wow.
now it's just like a much more stable existence.
Wow, this is amazing. And so, in getting better, can you talk a little bit about the protocol? Like, was it just antibiotics and then all the things that you had to do for the healing reactions, or what did that look like for your family?
It was, and I'll tell you why. I mean, like I was tapped out. I mean, I didn't have any money to go to Whole Foods. I mean, I didn't
Yeah.
have any, I couldn't live the life that they said you're supposed to live. And I'd already tried it and it didn't work when I did have money. I was like, that red dye didn't make a hell's beans difference, And I was like,
Yeah.
I can't spend $500 on supplements. And so I just like relied on, what my faith in that, like, and also that Dr. House show where he found the guy that had the
Yes.
splinter and he pulled it out and he was like, and I was like, okay. And I just trusted that everything would self-revert.
Yeah.
Like if this was, but then I started like delving into mycoplasma and how they work, and they parasitize your nutrients and they act like a virus, but they're not really a virus. And then they like get onto your host cell and they get inside the cell and they leave their antigens. That's where the confused antibodies come from.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so everybody's wrong about the rheumatic fever? Well, yeah.
Right.
I'm like, okay, this is too much. There's no, yeah. So then, I mean, and it wasn't just our family. Like, I mean, by then I'd kind of like made friends with a lot of people that kind of had PANDAS, I thought. And then I started realizing this isn't just, rheumatoid arthritis. It's also what I saw was addiction, because in families, it was like you got 3 siblings that have juvenile diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, and then addiction. And so I'm
Yeah.
like, wait, is addiction a standalone autoimmune disease or does a symptom of another one? Seems like it could be a standalone.
Right.
And so then we tried it with some addicts and then they had die off. But I came to realize that it was that combination of 19A and then the mycoplasma pneumonia that just
Right.
like wreaked havoc in his brain, because it was that pathogenic strain. So it's two things,
So
and then MRSA, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
So when you talk about rheumatic fever, so a lot of people, people are diagnosed with rheumatic fever, and they're told to basically live a lifestyle of a certain way, and so what you're saying potentially is that the rheumatic fever is it just a symptom potentially of that, or can you just talk a little bit more about that? And this is a personal question because I know an adult who, when she was young, she got rheumatic fever, but her whole life is now basically defined by staying away from all germs, which is hard in this world, right? Because, we live in a world of balance between, good pathogens, bad pathogens, good everything, bad everything. So yeah, if you could talk a little bit more about that.
So yeah, and honestly, like there's a reason that strep behaves the way that it does. That group A strep is group A strep. It behaves this way.
Yeah.
It presents these exotoxins. So why in this host does it do this? Because there's
Right.
another variable. And so it's like when you can find that other variable and you
Right.
can remove that, then there are going to be the antibodies there. And so that person would just want to stay on penicillin prophylactically, which is only 500 milligrams a day. Like that's like taking a vitamin. I mean, it doesn't hurt anything. And I mean, and then they should theoretically be able to live, normal life without having to have so much fear,
Right.
But I mean,
Yeah,
it's just like the whole COVID thing right now. Like, why weren't we staying 6 feet apart before?
I
Like,
know.
why were we not worried about, I'm not even going to make that comment, but I mean, mycoplasma has been, we're not worried about it. It's like written up in the pediatric literature. You're over here and it's like, okay. And I know this because I went back to school in January for a master's in molecular medicine, and I had just enough to know, no, they want you to believe that mycoplasma pneumonia is benign, and that even though a child has elevated liver enzymes and is also infected with mycoplasma pneumonia, don't do any further testing because it'll waste money because it's benign. Yet over here, 100% of liver cancer cells are infected with mycoplasma sinus. Oh, excuse me, but there's no
Yeah.
problem. So I'm like, okay, he's doing this.
And this is the part that I find is really, challenging, because a lot of times we live in this our Western medicine world is one treatment for the one condition, whereas there's a lot of co-founding variables, and it's hard to,
Absolutely.
you can't pick that apart in a 7.5 minute doctor's appointment. And also, nobody wants to send you for tests unless it's basically you're almost at the acute stage, right?
Right.
And so, whereas testing is it is so cheap in a lot of ways, even if you make the patient pay for it, right? Like whether it's a vitamin D deficiency test, and I get that some people can't afford to pay for that, but if we're not looking at all of these conditions simultaneously and saying, okay, could it be a nutrient deficiency? Where could that nutrient deficiency be from? And we need systemic thinkers in our system. We have to let go of this one diagnosis, one treatment mentality, because it is creating disaster in our healthcare system. We spend in the US, I can't even remember what it is, it's in the trillions of dollars every single year managing conditions, just trying to manage them for individuals, when if we actually were to divert a little bit of that money into actually just implementing systemic thinking into our practitioners, then I'm not there writing the checks for our medical system, so I get it. But we know prevention goes a long way, and we're not spending the money on prevention. We know that systemic thinking, and we need that interdisciplinary thinking that we could have in our medical system. But it's still, again, one individual who's trying to diagnose you, and they don't even know you in a 7.5 minute appointment.
They don't even know you, and they might just not like you.
Yeah, that
And
happens.
I mean, it happens. And the bottom line is, when you look at the schizophrenics and the ratio of the schizophrenics diagnosed have got much higher percentage of toxoplasmosis gondii. I mean, so is it asymptomatic? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
You got toxoplasmosis gondii that when it infects a rat, it drives the rat to the cat, because the parasite has to complete its life cycle in the cat's gut. So it completely changes the rat's behavior. So why is this so hard to believe that these kids that are going crazy don't have an infection in their brain that's not being treated? And why are we ignoring it? And why are we not, like you said, looking at multiple things? Because in my son's case, I mean, he ended up with 5 different things at the end of the day. And just teasing them apart. But it's like, one thing, what do I have? What's the treatment? 7 days is not enough. It's 7 days of antibiotics. It's not going to kill anything. It's just going to make it angry. It's like, just don't do them. I mean, at that point, it's.
So what do we do now? Now that we have this information, your story's getting out there. It's an Aaron Brockovich story. It is definitely Brain on Fire type of story. Movies have both been made in this situation. What is the path to healing? Which you actually do have that on your website at what'swrongwellness.com. But you do have a path to healing. So what can parents do and I imagine a lot of parents will be looking at their children and their behaviors, and they will actually be resonating with your story, whether that's the case for them or not. But, let's help them understand what they can do.
There's lots of options. I mean, like in the milder cases, there's no sense in putting anybody through things they don't need to go through. So it's like, changing the diet, improving sleep. If those things work, that's great. I mean, that's always the first go-to.
Okay.
Second, we can do a scan where we look for 1,600 biostressors. We look for parasites, viruses, bacteria that might be stressing the system out. And then we can use our research nutritional nutraceuticals, which are all natural. But I mean, they work, they're effective. We can manage the cytokine, misdirected cytokines, and then we can increase the NT killer cells. Then we can go in and target the organism specifically with targeted transfer factor or target the stressors. Um, and then sometimes I'm just like, this is above my pay grade. You need to go to this. I have several doctors that we work with. Some can work remotely. We can send lab orders. So, I mean, I think our whole mission is just like assess the client. How dire is the situation? And then B, what's the treatment going to look like? If we go into treatment, is that going to be worse? Like, what do we have to do to get this? Because we end up getting some really tough situations that nobody's been able to figure out. And then you've got to balance, well, if it's going to make them worse, what does that look like? And how do we prepare for that? Because I was not prepared for that. And so it's like just so there's not any one size fits all, but there are lots of options and there's lots of treatment protocols. And I love discussing options with people because I'm not here to say that one thing is absolutely the correct thing for everyone to do.
Right. And I like hearing that, there's also different degrees, right? So and the thing is, everything that you're suggesting is technically what we actually all need to be doing. We still live in a world where people are more afraid of supplements, that if you actually look at the adverse reactions from supplements and death from supplements with the CDC, it is literally a handful of cases, predominantly around iron. And when children get into their parents' iron supplements and they take that, okay, iron out of all the supplements. But we do have people who are afraid of nutraceuticals, but they're willing to take a painkiller from a med that they're going to be diagnosed with and potentially end up living on the streets from an addiction that is so strong that you'd rather kill yourself than not have that opioid. Okay. Exactly. So people need to switch their mind about the nutraceuticals because our bodies do need help. We live in a world where we don't have access to clean, fresh, real food all the time. Most of our food is so contaminated with pesticides, herbicides, everything that exacerbates your son's condition. And then we're not getting the nutrients in the food. So people need to understand that there is a role for nutraceuticals, even if you do not have anything that you just discussed, even if you just want to maintain like health at a level that is at the bare minimum. So sleep, of course, we know that is incredibly important. You don't need to be a neuroscientist to know that sleep is vital. It's where you do all of your regenerative healing. It's where you clear out the excess from the brain that can't get cleared out. It's so important. Now with I just want to go into this scan a little bit more. What does this scan look like? Like, do I have to fly to you to be able to do it? What does that look like?
No, I mean, like our mission is just make sure there's like no child left behind. I probably took that from somewhere else, but it's like if somebody needs help and they can't get help, I mean, of course we want you to try to get help from your doctor, but if you can't get it, we have plan B. And so we will drop ship you a scanner and they can download an app on their computer and then we can scan remotely. Like I have clients in Singapore and all different countries. It's, 2 a.m. I'm like, are we ready to scan? And
and what are they scanning? Can I ask?
Well, I mean, like we have this baby, so we have to lay her on her tummy because all the points have to touch the hand cradle. It's a Zyto hand cradle. And the Zyto hand cradle has a little bit of a bad rap. We're using it a lot differently than like you see it online because I wrote our own biosurvey for it. So it kind of comes with its own pre-programmed things, but ours is like next level. And so you just put your hand on it and then it takes about 15 minutes to scan and I can see kind of what your range is. And it's the same technology that the FBI uses for lie detection. It's galvanic skin response, except for we're pinging the neuroreticular activation system, which is the base of the spine. And we're just like pinging with virtual stressors. And so, I mean, the thing is that the interpretation piece is pretty big, because I mean, it'll pick up, like if you've had a vaccine, it'll show like you've got antibodies, and then it doesn't mean that person has that thing, so it's like
Right.
a thorough health history. You need lab work. I mean, this is like a clue, because it's looking for things that they're never going to look for in blood.
Right. Interesting. I do not understand it at all. And I'm going to be running it, like jumping in to just understand how it works more. I'm so curious about this. And that's the thing with blood work as well, is blood work does not actually tell you what is happening in your body. Your blood needs to maintain homeostasis. It doesn't tell you what's going on in your bones and your tissues. It doesn't understand what, and also a lot of blood work, people don't understand unless the physician who is requesting the blood work is specifically asking for certain tests to look for specific things, that it's not going to show up in your blood work. Most of my clients, they are all very sick and their blood work is perfect. Perfect.
Yeah, it's like there's 5,000 organisms. Well, we're going to just trust somebody to just take a stab at it.
Yeah,
Maybe it's
exactly.
this, like you've never even heard of this one over here. Like they don't take it. It is so true. And when I learned that all the clinical trials are based on serological testing, I was just like, I'm done. I mean, you're telling me
Exactly.
that you're running all these tests and you're making these statements that we all take to the bank to our grave and we have to live by, and you've not even spent the money to biopsy any tissue. Like you're
Exactly.
using our, I mean, seriously, I'm done. I'm like, okay,
And
that
the
explains a lot.
fact that we have all of these researchers and scientists out there in the labs who haven't questioned that yet. I get that it all comes back to what's economical for the world when you do have to run tests, but we're not going to be going to biopsy everybody and you have to know what you're looking for again. But the thing is that there's so many lives that are being completely wrecked. I mean, we went down that path. We went to Africa, to my village, where I was born. We swam in Lake Malawi. My family got schistosomiasis, which is a parasite, Bilharzia, but they don't see Bilharzia here. And so they wouldn't even run the test for it because they didn't even know what to run the test for until we said, you need to run the test. And they're like, oh, we'll just run blood work. No, because there's 3 different pathways that it can take: stool, urine, and blood, depending on what the parasite wanted to do that day. So it might not show up in the other test. So in fact, that's what happened. We had to get all 3 tests for each of us. Each of us presented differently. We also had very different symptoms. And, sometimes it attacks your kidneys, sometimes it attacks your colon. All of us had different symptoms, but the doctors didn't even want to run the tests. And all you had to do was Google, and that's what he ended up doing. That's how he educated himself enough to be like, oh, this is what I have to do to request, and on Google. And so we finally found out what it was. But by this time, my youngest daughter, we were in the cancer clinic because they found a mass on her bladder and assumed it was a tumor. And they told me, be prepared, your daughter has bladder cancer, and it does not fare well for children. So this is how our medical system is operating. And instead of just listening to us, because here we are, like all of us screaming and saying, we swam in the lake with the warning signs for schistosomiasis, please listen to us. And the doctor didn't want to listen to us. How many appointments later, what does that cost the medical system? All they had to do was listen to us the first time. So this is just another small, tiny example. We were able to get the drug, take it, all better within a week, no problem. But it was 6 months of medical appointments.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Just 6
That is
months.
so.
Just 6 months. So it doesn't compare in anything to what you went through. But just to highlight to people that do not be afraid to do the homework yourself. Go down all these routes, use your gut intuition as well. Don't let fear control you and take over, because that's not going to look good. But I mean, this was years and years and years of you doing it. Now your son is how old? 22?
He's 22.
And tell me about him now. How is he doing?
He's doing great. I mean, he went back to school, and then he he's great at the guitar. He's an amazing guitar player. He teaches jujitsu. He's like brown belt now. He was back in college, and then I was like, you can't keep taking antibiotics your whole life. You'll get, blah, blah, blah. And so he listened, and then he just slowly
Mm.
And so we just recently, I said, oh, we're going back and getting tested. And so he just had decided he was, you know, the thing about this is like you feel cured,
Yeah.
you feel cured. But if you catch strep again, you're up a creek.
Yes.
And it's not good. And so he caught it again at jiu-jitsu. And I mean, in that case, we did have him on the Bacillin XL shot, thinking he had coverage, but it's just like, it's just going to be.
So it's still a journey, but at the same time, though, he is functioning in society.
Oh yeah,
He's
he's
not
doing
in
great.
the
No,
justice system. He
no,
is able to learn how to play music and do it. Like, it's incredible. He works for your
he's
company as well.
he's incredible. And it's just like, and the only reason I even bring that up is for people. It's like, you just have to be vigilant. Like you
Yeah.
talk about, you've got to make good decisions and take care of yourself and get your sleep and keep your immune system up.
Yeah.
Like just because you feel great, it's still lurking. You just got to be always vigilant for the rest of your
Yeah.
life. But we should be vigilant anyway. So it's
Anyway,
not like
yes.
anything we're asking anybody to do that's like more than they should have been already doing, you know?
Exactly.
And so it has been a long journey, and we're really excited about just how much better he gets. And I'm engaged now. And I mean, I guess it's a good thing that because my fiance had never seen him in a flare. And
Right.
he was just like, he's only seen the good, the better. And so he watched it and he was like, you have to do a movie. I've never seen anything like
Yes.
it. And so it was good for him to see it, because it's like they're not themselves. And that just breaks my heart, because I think about all the kids that probably have this and did something super crazy and
Hmm.
do end up in their whole lives in the justice system. And I'll never forget when my son was 14 and we went to Duke, and the chief of, I won't say who it is because she was a great person. She was so nice. She was so helpful. She really, I mean, she diagnosed him, and I thought, I've got to have. Anyway, my son said, so can I get better? And she said, no, no, there's no, getting better. And he was like, so I'm going to be in prison the rest of my life. And she
Hmm.
didn't answer him. And he was devastated. He just jumped off the bed and ran away. And I was like, no, I'll never get him, you know?
Hmm.
And we were in the car on the way home, and he was like, I was like, that's not true. He goes, Mom, you can't be right. And every single other doctors were wrong. And I was like, yes, I am.
Yeah.
And so I just like had to keep him going, because you just kind of give up hope. Like he wants to hear, like, you're going to do something you didn't mean to do, because Dr. Trifletti had already told him that you disassociate, you don't know what you're doing. And
Yeah.
then you come out of the flare and you've got a 20-year prison sentence. Like, how this is just not just about my family. It's a travesty.
It is a
And it's like,
travesty. And
and
it's a
just,
travesty of the entire human system that we have created: the justice system, the medical system, our education system, our food system, right? Like, this is where, if anything, if we could just do anything, it would be to correct our food system so people just get healthy food, so they can start getting nutrients back into their body, so that they can diversify their microbiome to be, not just resilient, but literally thriving. And because just starting from that point could help so many people. We've seen this we've seen this in so many cases. The other thing as well that absolutely needs to stop, and I don't know why people do this, maybe people have just not heard enough amazing stories. We just have to look through history to find not just, dozens of stories like yours, but literally every story that's ever brought us here to this day is because of one person who was persistent, and they were not going to give up, and they were not going to say, no, there's not an answer, there's not a cure, there's no solution to this, no matter what it is. But we see this all the time. And what gives an individual the right to say there's no solution? That person immediately, and I know that wasn't her fault, and I'm sure she's seen so many things, but even if you had spent your entire life trying to find the answer, there's a good probability somebody would stand on the shoulders, and you have very beautiful, big, amazing shoulders, built up from all of this research and persistence, and somebody would have come along and they would have found the answer. But do we just all give up? What is that about? No, if you have a gut feeling about something, you keep fighting for it. Because there's always a solution.
There's always a solution. I mean, we weren't
Yes.
created to have this much disease.
No.
It's not in the plan. And it's like, so there's something else. And what is it? And I mean, in our case, because we already did eat so healthy and we did try the things, but ours was a very extreme case,
Yes.
and then in some of the milder cases, you can correct just small things and
Yeah.
and go on and it's fine, so it's just like, I don't understand why the intakes at the juvenile detention center don't consist of, why don't we send you to a doctor that's going to test for these things? Why
Yeah.
don't we just rule out these things that can all cause these behaviors, impulsive behaviors, affect your executive functioning?
Yeah.
Why are we not doing that? I mean, that seems like a small thing. So
Yeah.
like, yeah, a boost in nutrition and, just check off the boxes.
Exactly. You and I think we need to get together and we can just dream up a world like the justice system that we want to see, the education system that we want to see, where we incorporate all this and we just co-design that, even if it's only in our dreams right now, because eventually it will happen. It might take us a few hundred years. I hope it's not that long. So in the meantime, people, I can talk to you forever. There are just so many bits of your story I just want to dive into. But in the meantime, you have an amazing book that just came out.
Yes, it's
Can you
called What's
please?
Wrong with My Child. It's
Yes,
here in the
please tell
background.
us. Beautiful.
And the first book I wrote, it was funny because when I was like thinking like I wrote a book and I was like, I called it America is Infected. And I put like these bio warfare. It was like 400 pages of like this antigen and this, but I mixed the story in with it. So everybody was like, huh?
Right.
So I got a publisher and she was like, you're gonna have to cut like half of that. And I was like, you can't cut half of it. So then they bring an editor in to make the choices. And so this is the result. Everybody that reads it says they can't put it down. So I think she did a phenomenal job. And
Amazing.
she was really great. And Morgan and James is my publisher, and they've been great. And with, Command Your Brand, and the book launches on October the 26th. And so I just pray that it can help a lot of families. And if it's not affecting your family, it might be affecting a family that you know of, and just launching my social media, because I just launched that because it's really struggled for me since I've been in it, but it's just like watching the people say this looks like your family, not,
Yeah.
maybe this will help. And it's just like got me really inspired, and even
Yeah.
like a neurologist, like ask a question, and so it's like I really appreciate those that are willing to be open-minded and understand that none of us know everything, and it's not just because they told you something. Like, symptoms change a lot faster than textbooks can be rewritten. It's like every 4
Exactly.
years. This is like, we were in a textbook from 2016, it's 2021. I'm like, why are we limited to this? And this is what you go out fighting everything with, and I feel sorry for them, because it's not, I just, it's just sad. But like you
Yeah.
said, we just spread and educate. We're building this. I've teamed up with this amazing researcher in Australia. I won't say who it is, but I found him on this journey because I was building this huge symptoms checker. Now, like you said, it's never just one thing,
No.
but we're also programmed to think it. So I was like, okay, I'm going to do a symptoms checker and put all the symptoms, and we're doing like 15 to 20 of the most common organisms. So basically, you can go through and click like, this is it in this 100% of the time, or like 10% of the time, and then this is the diseases it causes. So we're working on that. That'll be ready. You get a free symptoms checker when you order your book, just because we want people to have it.
Yeah.
And then we've got research on the website. So just like me, if you find research that is applicable, I've tried to put all kinds of syndromes, disorders, diseases, diagnoses, psychiatric, everything. You can just download it and take it in. And a physician will have to respect a peer-reviewed article.
Yeah.
And
There you
so we're
go.
just trying to like provide a lot of options.
Yeah. And I love what you said earlier as well about how your doctor fired you, because one thing we teach our clients to do is to actually fire their doctor. So if you've been going back and they keep on saying nothing's wrong with you, or, just keep taking this drug, just keep taking it, just hang on to that because it's going to get better. And nothing's changing, and they do not want to give you the time of day. If you show up with research, and like the 11th out of the 12th pediatricians that I interviewed for my daughter he said, I'm not going to read that. Well, I don't, you can't fire me because I'm firing you right now, thing. And it's important for people to take, if anything, that's the first thing you need to do until you find a doctor that is going to want to listen to you, because it's a trust both ways, that they have to trust you, you have to trust them. And then from that place, you can co-create solutions for your family based on, some people may not have the resources to go down the route that you went. So they're going to have to come up with another solution, and there will be another solution. It might not be the ultimate outcome, but it's going to be a balance of what you, within the context of your world and family and financial resources and education, will be able to manage and support and everything. But you absolutely need to fire your doctor if they are not going to work with you to find a solution.
I'm so glad to hear you say that. I mean, because we've just elevated that to like a godlike status. And I don't think we've actually done it ourselves. I think that like it's been done for us, but it's like they're not gods. I mean, and if they act like they know everything, then fire them. Yeah.
Yeah. And especially because we live in a world where, like you said, the information is coming out so fast, faster than we can even put a book together and print it. And so if somebody's and they say, I have a really great book called How Doctors Think that lets you know that things like, if your doctor graduated 25 years ago from med school, there's a very high percentage of those doctors that are still prescribing the same medications from 25 years ago that they learned about, because they're not learning anything new. A lot of them, sure, they go for these, credits every single year, but it might not be in what you need. It might only be in their specialty. They're not looking into other specialties as well. So it is very important that you get a doctor who's just continuously learning and wanting to, to serve you, that they have you on the pedestal versus you having them on the pedestal. So It's important.
Yeah. And the primary physician and the pediatrician have just become glorified traffic directors.
Totally.
Go here, go here. And it's like, wait a minute, where's the brain that's like putting all this together? Like, why is the adult going over here and the child over here? Everybody needs to go to the same. There needs to be one person, a case manager for the family. I mean, it's like we would solve so many things very easily like that.
Yeah. And you gave us lots of great tips as well. Like, you know what? You can't get the drug. I guarantee you there's probably a good way that you can get a good version of that drug. 2, that you can go and make those specialist appointments yourself. You don't have to wait, because too many people say, well, my doctor never called me back. He never sent in the referral. The specialist never called me back. Then get off your ass and go and make it happen. And that's exactly what you've taught us today. So how can people, first of all, is there anything that we have missed that you are just dying to share with our audience that you're like, you need to know this?
No, we've covered everything.
Okay. And where can people find you?
What'swrongwellness.com. I will say that the COVID long haulers, underlying organisms. So, if you get into a situation with COVID, definitely look at the underlying infections and targeting those. And what'swrongwellness.com. Come there. You can, find all the research. Just email us, and we'll do our best to help.
This is incredible. And your book's coming out on October 26th, which is just around the corner. So we're going to make sure that this podcast gets out starting our next, we're going to bump it up there just so we can promote this book to everybody. And I can't wait to get a copy of it myself. I'm going to be devouring it. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing your incredible story of courage, determination, love for your family, and putting your ego aside to be able to really dive in and get an answer that is going to help lots and lots of people. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back, everyone. You know what to do. If you love that show as much as I did, please share this. Storytelling has been at the foundation and root of human civilization Back then, it still is now. That's what Instagram is, Facebook is, videos, YouTube, podcasting. It's just all about sharing stories. So this is yet another really important story, though, that really needs to get into the hands of so many people, because your family might be suffering from this. You might have already experienced the loss from everything that Elizabeth talked about in her podcast. And it's really important to just start with the basics. Everything that she suggests in her PATH program is needed. So head over to her website at What's Wrong Wellness and get that link, share it with others, but share it along with this episode, because I know that the way she tells her story is what is so powerful to allow people to resonate. Everybody's going to resonate with a different aspect of the story, but it's just so important that you share. So thanks everyone for listening to the Eat Real to Heal podcast. It has been a pleasure. Thank you to Elizabeth Harris, and we'll see you next time with a new episode. Bye for now.